coming is the issues of funeral assurance. Do I get a decent burial now that there isn't money that is coming from CBNRM? That was also a concern. And like I've said, if you look very closely in terms of what are the concerns, what is it that people are saying lost? They're not only looking at the immediate income that has been lost, they're not looking at the immediate jobs that have been lost. They are more worried about a secure future. So in short, CBNRM did to some extent, and in my personal opinion, to a greater extent, did guarantee what I've quoted here as a secure future for the community, not only for the household, but a secure future for the community. Now that all this is lost, the income, the jobs that I've talked about, I've even left out some of the things because I think for me, I found it very engaging to see the loss as a loss for the future. And this I quote directly from some of the respondents. So we can go into detail, Dr. Libilo, and even look at the finances in terms of understanding, for example, for the two communities in Zimbabwe that we spoke to, what is the extent of the loss? Those numbers, I think they're very important for very many audiences and also for people that are looking to invest into these communities. But I think what's really important is how do we regain or how do we secure that future for those communities? What has also been lost is a social fabric. That's the second most important thing that communities see or have a feeling that we're beginning to lose. So CBNRM would afford people in many contexts the opportunity to meet and decide. In some instances, very low budgets, but the issues they would convene to discuss are issues of water, community development, how do we allocate scholarships, how do we repair balls, and so on. Brought some social cohesion in some contexts. And there's a feeling that if people don't convene, they don't get to come and work together in unity, all that is potentially lost for the future, and reestablishing that might be costly, or it might not even be possible. And the third aspect is what I would call the erosion of the capital base, right? So from these interviews, we're beginning to hear that behaviors that have been extinct in these communities is beginning to resurface in significant ways. That includes issues of anti-poaching of poaching for very many purposes. And I think the press as well, as we're reading around during this study, the press as well points to some cartels that are emerging, and this trade is being facilitated by, particularly around bushmeat, by outsiders, and insiders are also involved. And the feeling we got is people feel that the longer that this crisis stays, they are also going to lose their asset base. So all the training, the environmental awareness that has gone in, potentially can be wiped away as if this crisis continues. I think, Dr. Lebilo, I'll stop here. But just to recap, I've talked about 3 things, and I think one of them is very important for me is that the COVID-19 impact on communities is actually a loss of a hope of a good future. So I'll stop here.
Thank you very much for that elaborative contribution, discussion, very interesting things coming out of there. And as we continue to engage and discuss in this conversation today, I invite the other panelists, Comrade Simangeli, you're welcome to talk about yourself, but also zero in into the questions. that we are discussing today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair, for the opportunity, and good afternoon from South Africa for everyone who is watching. So I currently work for Wild Oceans, which is a program of the Wild Trust. And there's a project to be implementing in partnership with Ismangaliso Wetland Park and Ezemvelo KZN Wildlife. So I work very closely with communities that live within and adjacent to Ismangaliso Wetland Park. Now, a lot of the people in these communities depend either on trading fresh fruits and vegetables to tourists in the towns that surround the park, or through selling craft work, and for some of them working for a lot of businesses that do tour operators, and some of them in a more informal manner. They've grown up in an area, they know it very well, and if there's tourists that are looking for someone who's going to walk them and give a tour, they can do that on their personal basis, apart from working for the big companies around. So of course, with COVID-19, we had related lockdowns, which meant not only international tourism was restricted, but even tourism within the country itself, moving within the province, and at some point, moving within your town was restricted. And at that point, this meant zero income for a lot of community members. Of course, there were some efforts by the government to try and assist at a more business level. We had the Tourism Relief Fund, which was meant for small and medium enterprises. We had the Unemployment Insurance Fund, which was then released to people who couldn't work at that time. But as you can see, that this was more for the more formal employees or business, so to say, whereas we always know that the sector, to a large extent, you do have what you call informal jobs and other activities surrounding the tourism industry. So a lot of people were affected, livelihoods were affected to a large extent, where it ended up that for most people, their sole means of survival were food parcels. Now, these food parcels, some were given by the government itself, and some by NGOs that work with these communities. Wild Oceans did participate in that initiative, and we are still assisting with food parcels, understanding the condition of these communities, and of course that unemployment, which was already bad, has went up into South Africa. So there is still a need to support communities. I will just add a bit and say what is unfortunate though, which I'm hoping to hear from my panelists, whether it's an experience from his country as well, is while you had these relief packages, there's been an element of corruption or maladministration, if I can touch that, where they don't end up making it to the hands of the people that they are meant for. Or if they do, not the amounts or the quantity that it's meant to be. But in a nutshell, I'll stop there and just reiterate that livelihoods in these communities that I work with in South Africa were greatly affected as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for also highlighting issues. Yeah, so just as to add up to the discussions, I saw also having experiences here in Zambia. Of course, I'm chairing community forum, but also working for an NGO, and we have been experiencing similar challenges that you highlight in terms of loss of income, jobs. Of course, our country didn't really go through a complete lockdown, but of course there was limitation because we couldn't really allow international visitors in the country. And obviously we don't have a strong local economy where we have a lot of tourists locally at home and so on. But yes, you raise a last very important question about these relief packages. I know that in my country, at the height of COVID-19, the Minister of Finance did announce a 10 billion that was meant to go to, has actually really reached out to local communities. And so it's an issue of interest, of course, as we discuss. But just to build further to this discussion, as you might really be aware, that more than 50 leaders of communities in Southern Africa had actually written a letter to the celebrities in the UK to stop their influence that undermine human rights in terms of impoverished people, in terms of trying to bring in campaigns that will affect conservation efforts of rural communities. And I think as part of the agenda for this discussion, I'll ask. I think maybe I'll start with the Comrade Miengwa there to maybe zero in what you might think in terms of communities, community voices and experiences in terms of these global campaigns. What is your reaction towards such global campaigns that undermine the local community efforts in terms of protecting, managing, and benefiting from wildlife in Southern Africa, especially?
Thank you, Dr. Lubilo, for the question, which I also want to just to contextualize. So my understanding of the global processes, I think CITES included, and the current global onslaught on activities promoting alternative livelihoods on communities. I think I would want to approach it from two perspectives. Just to build upon the initial observation that I gave, that CBNRM provides the future for communities. And where does that statement come from? It comes from the consistent and persistent investment that CBNRM has done in these communities for more than 2 decades. CBNRM is, like I said, it has been consistent and persistent in the sense that it's the one of the only guaranteed sources of income for these local communities. But it also takes an understanding of the local realities that these communities live in. It's beyond social media, it's beyond, it takes living and interacting with these communities to understand what this means, right? So you can try to approach CBNRM from quite a critical perspective that the hunting has to stop, the industry has to stop, and so on, which I think by respecting the perspective of others, I think rightly so, they have entitled to those opinions. But what the other movement needs to do, from my own perspective, is they need to ground it. I followed a lot of the campaigns. They tend to one or two events, generate a lot of social media traction, well orchestrated and taken up by veteran, what I'll call veteran activists, who then lodge these issues into the international arena without a solid grounding of the realities on the ground. So one of my direct answers to this, Dr. Lubilo, is yes, CBNRM has got its own flaws, and those flaws have been overemphasized. But what is the next best thing to CBNRM in this community? I know there's a section where we are going to talk about what is coming. You've alluded to that. I mean, we've got the figures here that since the COVID-19 impact hit, governments have not been able to channel money to compensate for the lost income. So all the social programs that we talked about have not been funded. zero. There is no allocation from the fiscus to cover these communities, right? The little effort that these other NGOs are doing has been able to support part of the salary for people that are employed in these communities. So for me, I think it's really a nuanced discussion that we're having here. My personal opinion is well and good. People are entitled to making international campaigns, but I think what matters is to listen to the community voices. And this is what we've been trying to do for the past 15 years. And I cannot claim that I understand community voices much better, but I've learned to listen much better and get a better appreciation of what CBNRM does. To be honest, I think I started on the extreme side of criticizing CBNRM and so on. But when you sit and listen to the realities, the local realities of what is happening on the ground and what hope CBNRM offers, I challenge the same organizations, the same people to say, okay, if we feel that CBNRM is not the way to go, what is the other consistent and persistent mechanism of funding community development? Because CBNRM has been doing it for more than 2 decades now. So rather than throwing the baby with the bathwater, I think we need solutions, positive engagement, and not necessarily come and say we have to do away with A and B and C, because the moment we do that, we further sideline the local communities, making them even more and more silent in the global arena. Yet it's their voice that needs to be actually amplified at this point. Thank you, Dr. Luna.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you actually highlight a number of things, and I'm sure Comrade Smangeli, you would also like to react to that, maybe building on what Comrade Miengo said, but also basically looking at your experience in terms of how this global influence goes further to undermine our abilities as communities, and of course, how resilient, how strong are we as communities to stand up to such strong global forces?
Yeah. I must say, for a lot of campaigns, once you put the face of the celebrity, there are a lot of people follow either because of their talent or skills. It easily gains momentum. But I think on my side, I would love to spend more time actually reflecting on what has been my observations recently. That we tend to have a youth population. I'm saying this as a youth myself, that if you see a campaign that has a broader tagline of save nature, it's very common that a lot of people then don't read the fine print of what it's saying. Because once you read deeper, some of them you're like, but these are things we do in my community, but forms the basis of life in my community. So I can't, really be supporting a campaign of that nature because it's not vested in the reality of where I come from. I wanted to touch that and move actually to a phase where I say, when people join or support campaigns, I want to advise them to actually read all the documents except for the bigger tagline, and also read the science that informs those campaigns. Specifically, we've seen this with a lot of wildlife campaigns. And another thing that I feel we don't acknowledge is that it is a reality that you can have a country where a certain wildlife species is declining, but you can have a country where we have reached the carrying capacity. And to that effect, there are activities one way or another that are done to manage those populations. So sometimes I feel with the campaigns, if you look them at face value, it's easy to end up supporting other things, where else if you were to read further and read more in a national context or perspective where that activity is happening, it actually puts it into perspective that you are probably dealing with a country where populations are higher anyway, growing every time, way above carrying capacity, and where there is a need for local communities, there's not much of financing coming from the outside. So yeah, I guess in short, and I'm saying this because I'm youth myself, and I've seen how easy it is to see a campaign and you sign up without actually reading and going further into what does this mean in a local context. Yeah, I'll stop it there. My colleague, of course, will have a lot of scientific contribution into this.
Comrade Myengwa, I can see you would like to continue this discussion.
So sort of the evidence, right? So we have a case of Botswana that we can look at in terms of what happened when you impose, for me, an external voice over and above local reason, right? So Botswana was one of the countries that took a drastic position and banned the hunting some years ago. The CBNRM program in Botswana took a significant hit, and I'm sure, Rogers, you agree with me that the team was lost, completely lost. Now, if you're looking for any data on Botswana, the latest that you get is 2018. So with a lot of efforts around documenting CBNRM, income that is coming through and so on. But when the hunting ban was imposed, the incomes declined, and all the other support services that normally follow CBNRM also declined, right? It's only last year that Botswana decided to reintroduce hunting, that you see the associations beginning to take momentum, beginning to take shape. And when you've got a vibrant CBO at local level, it sort of energizes all the other sectors, the other arms of government, in terms of building accountability, making sure that the Minister of Environment is accountable in terms of how it allocates quotas. There's a lot of evidence out there which shows that when you impose global answers to local problems, and we often want to see Southern Africa as quite a unique and a distinct region in terms of its approach towards sustainable use. That might not go well with the global norm, but it doesn't mean SADC or Southern Africa is to also go with the grain. I will not touch a lot more on the extent to which this marginalizes not only communities on political rights, how it marginalizes communities on economic rights, because that is purely refusing people an opportunity to trade an asset that they own in order to maximize the value. But like what Mangai says is, I need to comment on the science. The science is there. Let's look at the case of Botswana and we see how the CBNRM program suffered there when you impose solutions that are not that do not emanate from the local realities.
Thank you so much, comrade. I think we need to continue to discuss or comments that you'd like to.
Okay, so I can also take the other comment on the
first to the panelists. You are most welcome to do so, and I can already see that there are a number of questions there.
Yeah.
Are you connected?
Yes.
So maybe we have lost Simangele for now. So, Comrade Dr. Myengwa, maybe you can go ahead and respond to the first question or the question or comments as you can see them from the screen.
Okay. So the first question, the answer is no. So the question is asking whether the same organizations that antagonize or that are anti-hunting also provide the same level of support to communities in order to replace or to compensate for the lost income? The answer to that is a straight no. From the assessment we've done in 6 countries, there is no complementary funding that is coming from any source. And just to confirm this with panelists, I actually, as I was preparing for this, I had an opportunity to call one of the persons that I interviewed during the October-September period, where we were compiling this evidence, to check on whether any of the good friends have come along and provided them with support for all their programs, the social programs. And the answer was no. So the answer is no. There is no one else who is stepping up to provide support for the lost income. In case the panelists joined later, I think I did make an argument that CBNRM is the most persistent and consistent source of funding for rural community development in Africa. And the NGO space in Africa focusing on relief does not build on the other components that CBNRM does, which is specifically the diversification of income, business itself, where communities running lodges, skills and mentorship programs that are awash in the region. And these are linked, I think, as you're all aware, with prestigious colleges in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, Nwekas, Shandike, and those provide pathways for more sustainable income. To the extent that would want to see, I think it would take a lot of time and a lot of investments for any new sources of funding to match what currently CBNRM has been able to provide. But I think beyond that, I would also want to see this in a different way, in the sense that we are, with CBNRM, we are promoting communities to move away from handouts, right? Merely dependent syndrome, which normally comes with donor aid. I think Dambisa Moyo does talk about that. She makes a lot of noise that Africa does not need aid. So any form of income that seeks to replace what communities are currently working and earning, because remember, CBNRM incomes are generated out of specific activities, and the funds that accrue to these communities are not donor aid. It's income that they earn. So they can then choose to invest in order to earn more, which is unlike a scenario where someone would think of deciding that they can put a new pot of funds and let community feed from that and provide it on an annual basis in order to stop hunting or any of these tourism activities. I think that's my submission, Dr. Libilo, on this. Let me check if there's been another question, and then
yes, please. There are several questions. Actually, I hope that Comrade Smangele will be able to join us again. Yeah, just for our viewers, if you have more questions, you are most welcome to do so. But just to echo what you earlier said, Dr. Muyengwa, is that the unsustainable use organizations or who have the global influence, I think equally the same in my country. We don't see much support from them in terms of replacing the lost income that communities lose out of failure to sustainably use their wildlife resources. Yeah, so they are not here, and so we hear their voices from a distance, and sometimes we really don't want to bother much about them. But yes, there are some questions. So, Comrade Muyengwa, as you digest, we are getting towards the closure, there are a number of few things again that comes to mind in terms of how have rural economies created sustainable means of living amidst what are dangerous living conditions in rural areas. And maybe as you look at that, you could also policy recommendations you'd be able to make that you position.
I think I lost you on. I lost
Yes,
you.
please. I can go ahead. What I was saying is that basically building on our discussion, on our conversation, I agree with some of your contribution about the non-existence in terms of contribution or replacement of revenues to communities who have lost in terms of the campaigns by the influential voices. But there are other issues, and I was asking that how have rural economies created sustainable means of living amidst what are dangerous living conditions in rural areas? But I was also saying that in looking at those rural economies, which are actually sustainable means, and how they impact in terms of rural communities' livelihoods, maybe also consider to think about what policy recommendations that you do recommend so that communities can position themselves to defend against influential voices, which are actually pro unsustainable use. So I see Comrade Mangele, you are back. So if you are able to join up, we are most welcome, but maybe Comrade Mienga, maybe in 2 minutes, just to respond to this, and then we can allow us Mangele to pick up from there.
All right. So the studies that we've done around the regions and also done by other researchers actually show you that CBNRM contributes to between 60 and 80% of the total livelihood composition in these marginal areas that we're talking about. So when you talk of rural areas, I think we need to make a clear distinction that CBNRM areas would be in rural areas 2.0, right? Where the conditions are difficult, right? It's different from a normal rural area where people are living close to cities and farming. Mostly we're talking of communities that are living on the edge and on the margins. So what has CBNRM done? It has supported 60 to 80% of those livelihoods. So if you do a thorough scientific investigation, try and track the source of income, and eventually what the household eats or what it consumes, you find that the CBNRM contributes 60 to 80% of that. How have we been able to do that? Various CBNRM programs, initiatives, innovations have been implemented over the years. Programs to mitigate human-wildlife conflict, selective watering and grazing points, the bombers, and so on. What's typical about these programs is they are seeking to minimize the risks of living in these areas in order to maximize the income that communities get. So if you minimize the number of animals that are lost due to predation, loss of life, and so on, it simply helps maximize the income that goes to these communities. So you've also asked me to be brief about moving ahead. I think for me, a stronger voice is required, where I propose what I'll call CBNRM 4.0. CBNRM 4.0, it's beyond the third generation CBNRM that was discussed by the founders. But in short, what CBNRM 4.0 or CBNRM of that nature will entail, it will entail more affluent members of the SADC or of the African community taking up these issues to the international global arena in the form of all unified associations. I think associations need to move and become more political and more proactive in order to further the cause of these communities. And in doing so, yes, they will fight for political rights and increase economic rights. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Comrade. I think we are running out of time. Basically, I would like to thank Lizzie, who made the earlier question, but there's also a comment from Max, and basically she's saying Southern African youth need more engagement on the community conservation issues and be part of their communities to make inputs and contribute towards our rule of voices and developments. And Lizzie is also saying tourism is likely to take several years before recovering to 2019 levels. But what options exist to diversify livelihoods in areas dependent upon tourism in the interim period? So I think, Simangele, you have like maybe 2 minutes, and then would like to use the last 3 minutes to watch the video from our South Africa Resource Trust. Thank you very much, and yeah, sure.
Yes, thank you so much, Rogers, and apologies. I think everyone who works in the rural communities in Africa can relate with the connection issues that can break in the middle of meetings. Perhaps to respond to Lizzie's question and also touch on what has been happening in South Africa, when the pandemic restricted people to stay at home and stay away from work, what we saw was something that a lot of people have been pushing for a long time, for people to have their own community gardens. We started having an explosion of people taking it into their own hands to plant their food. Those who already had their gardens were actually diversifying their crops. What was more inspiring for me as a young person's perspective was I got to stay home as well, which is something that hasn't happened in a long time. And I found myself starting a family garden as well. So I would say in this context, Liz, that what has been interesting is to see that we've started having this locally led initiatives where it's communities themselves who've taken it upon their hands and say, you know what, we can actually grow our own food. We can actually diversify what we have, what we used to find in the shop. If we are not finding it now, we can actually start doing that. And of course, there's been a contribution of other NGOs as well, whom instead of just donating food parcels, opted to donate seedlings or seeds to start and say, this is a process you can apply, and they deliver it to you. So this has inspired that movement where people are involved in making their own food. So I think I will end it in that note on just my observation in South Africa and specifically in the communities where I'm based.
Okay, thank you so much, Comrade. I hope, Comrade Myenga, you are still around. There is a number of days we will try to adjust our ending time. We still have some few more minutes. And there is another question from Marlon. Marlon is saying, what is the level of engagement issues? Why should young people? Would you want to quickly respond to that, Simangele? Maybe in a minute, and then Comrade Shylock, and then I'll let the video play.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sure.
I will touch and say, yeah, I will touch and say what becomes, I don't want to call it interesting because it's not actually a good thing. That at a local level, because young people tend to move for educational purposes, either to a secondary school or to university, you often find that they're so disengaged to the local issues of their communities, especially when it comes to, sustainable use of resources. So I do think the level of engagement for youth, specifically for those who don't spend a lot of time in their communities, gets very low. But I hope, as we all agree, that young people should get involved because, of course, not only are they going to be living with these consequences, they are already living with them now. And every generation leads and hands over to another. And if we don't have a youth population that we've actually capacitated to handle and drive programs in the space, we will be heading towards a problem. So there is great need for capacitation of young people, even though they're disengaged from their communities, to be better prepared to lead in the space. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. While our colleagues are going to set up the video, Comrade Myengwa, maybe you can maybe help us a bit in what you think might be the role in protecting their rights to sustainability. What should be the role of the regional secretariats in supporting rural communities and protecting their rights to sustainability?
Sorry, with regional secretariats, you are referring to?
I think we are referring to our, in Southern Africa, we have a number of networks. We have the Community Leaders Network, we have the CBNRM Thought Leaders Network, we have different CBNRM networks. I think we have conservation networks around. So I believe we are looking at that. These regional secretariats that support, I think, community voices. Yeah, so if you'd be brief on that, I can see a comment very quickly from Steve. Thanks for the discussion. Great to hear about the good work happening at community level. So maybe if you could be brief on that, then I'll ask our colleagues to play the video so that we can remain with the last 2 minutes to wrap up the discussion for the day. Thank you, Comrade.
Yeah, and also thanks to Dare for your comment. It is noted. So I think this is what needs to be done. Let's look at the SADC landscape. If you go to Malawi, there's no one unifying association. We've got about 7 regional associations that are looking at CBNRM issues. So that is starting point number 1. The networks need to be strengthened, unified, and organized. Right. So I've just given you a case of Malawi. They are regionalized, which is important. You can capture as many voices as possible. If you look at Zambia, the forum and the association, I think the forum is a bit stronger, but the association actually needs to be very, very strong because that is the actual voice that needs to be heard at the global arena. Botswana, we talked that it's been a crisis. Zimbabwe's got its leaps and bounds. So that level of organization, I'm not seeing it yet. That's what I'm arguing, that we need a 4.0 CBNRM to emerge, which is strongly supported by the youth, right? Youth advocacy has to come in and partner with this voice. It's no longer the Madala or the old people's issues of looking at wildlife. So I think the likes of Simangele, the community leaders networks need to come together and craft a regional strategy. Just as was the case under SASAG, we used to have a position that we could defend and support and present to the world, argue until it was adopted. But the voice is now fragmented, so it needs to be reunited. And once it's reunited, and mind you, this is a lot of work, but once we have that common voice, I think we can push these issues in a much stronger way. Thank you, Dr. Lubigo, for
Yeah. So thank you so much, both Comrade Simangele, the panelists for today, and Dr. Myengwa, the other panelists, and all the viewers and the participants who have participated in this discussion. I think it was very useful. And yes, I need to recognize the data. Thank you for your comments there, and all those that have not been able to make contribution, but I think they've been following the discussions. Indeed, we really need to work together. We need to defend the community voices. We need to support CBNRM initiatives in Southern Africa and remain steadfast, organized, and sustainable. Thank you.
As representatives of millions of rural Africans, the majority of whom live below the poverty line. We are urgently appealing to you, as celebrities with status, to stop undermining our globally recognized conservation efforts and our basic human right to sustainably use the natural resources on which our communities' livelihoods depend. You have lent your names to campaigns to stop hunting in Africa, and we acknowledge that you are doing so with the best of intentions, and we welcome your interests in our wildlife. But you have expressed these views without full appreciation of the implications for our people or our wildlife, and without consulting us, who live with and manage African wildlife, and who ultimately determine its future. These campaigns dismiss the beneficial impacts of regulated trophy hunting on local communities and our wildlife populations as myths. We'd like to share our perspectives and invite you to visit our communities to witness and understand the realities of conservation in Africa. Successful conservation must start with those of us who live alongside dangerous large animals whose value is deeply ingrained in our cultures. During colonial times, European colonialists removed our rights to manage and benefit from these animals, and in many instances, forcefully evicted us from our lands, often to make way for protected areas. A disaster for conservation, our traditions, and our livelihoods. Post-independent governments restored our rights, integrating wildlife into rural economies through inclusive conservation approaches. This provided socio-economic incentives to live with and sustainably manage our wildlife. On average, 50 to 90% of these economic incentives come from sustainable, regulated, humane, and scientifically verified hunting methods. This has led to increasing wildlife populations, in stark contrast to other regions in the world, where biodiversity loss and habitat destruction accelerate at disastrous rates. Though you may view elephants, lions, and other wildlife through a romantic, idolized lens, our daily reality of living with these magnificent and valued yet dangerous animals requires more pragmatism. We worry daily that our children may be killed on their way to school, or that our ability to provide for our families will be destroyed within a few hours by elephants in our fields or large predators among our livestock. Some facts for consideration. As recently as the 1st of July 2020, an elephant killed a 22-year-old man in Zimbabwe as he walked home from his fields. Large numbers of people are killed in Africa by dangerous wild animals per year, injuring dozens more and destroying the livelihoods of thousands. Recently, 2 Zimbabwean siblings disappeared from their home. Only the dismembered head of the 2-year-old was recovered from a suspected hyena attack, and the 4-year-old has never been found. Despite this, elephants, lions, and other species live amongst us and are multiplying because we want them to. The harsh reality is that if incentives for us to conserve and share our land with wildlife are removed, the future in Africa will be as bleak as that of the wolves, brown bears, and other large carnivores that were once plentiful in the UK, Europe, and the US. We appreciate that for those not familiar with the realities of rural Africa, it may seem a counterintuitive conservation strategy. But if your objective is conservation, not solely recognizing individual animal rights, we call upon you, before passing judgment, to understand and consider our perspectives from a conservation method that recognizes the basic human rights of our peoples to manage and benefit from sustainable use of our natural resources. If we cannot feed our families through humane and sustainable use of wildlife, we will have no option but to adopt land use that will invariably destroy our beautiful natural landscapes and exterminate our treasured wild animals. We are tired of people from elsewhere, far removed from our realities, talking on our behalf and undermining our successes. We are an integral part of the solution to illegal wildlife trade, poaching, and unsustainable use of biodiversity. It's disappointing that while animal rights campaigns to stop hunting have raised enormous sums of money, we have yet to see evidence of those funds conserving African wildlife or benefiting any of our communities in their role as custodians of that wildlife. What and who do these campaigns benefit? Their impact will be to remove our incentives to manage and live side by side with wildlife. Imposing worldviews amplified through your powerful, influential voices results in disastrous policies that undermine our rights and conservation successes. We recognize and respect the rights for you to discuss how best to manage African wildlife. However, these discussions must be informed by our voices as custodians of this wildlife. At a minimum, this should acknowledge our community's right to earn a livelihood through culturally appropriate and sustainable management of our resources. Anything less is to put the animals' rights before the rights of Africans. We write this letter as the world is demanding the acknowledgement and righting of past and present wrongs and belief systems based on privilege. We want you to hear our voices. Our conservation successes, lived realities are not myths.
Thank you very much for that nice clip. I'm sure it is a number of lessons, interesting discussions out there. I think we are coming to the end of our discussion for today. I'll begin with the Comrade Mienga. 1 minute or few seconds to say bye to the viewers and participants, and then Smangeli, and then we wrap.
Thank you to all the viewers. And I think the message that resonates is CBNRM is the future for the communities, and it will take living and understanding these communities in order to understand the logic of CBNRM.
Thank you, Comrade.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much, colleagues. I wanted to thank you for the invitation as well, and say for me, it is so inspiring to be amongst the leaders who are working with communities at the ground level. And I really hope that we can keep this momentum and have more young people involved in working with conservation issues in their areas and the communities where they come from. Thank you.
Thank you so much for today's discussion. To my two colleagues, the panelists, your contribution was great today. To the organizers of this webinar discussion, South Africa Resource Trust, thank you very much for giving the communities an opportunity to hear the community voices. To our friends who participated in the discussion today, thank you very much. Indeed, we need to even in the midst of COVID-19 through. Of course, we need to look at serious intervention that will address the challenges that communities are likely to face, because the impact caused by COVID-19 might take years to recover. But like, we don't want to see a situation where we lose our hope, or we lose our resources, or we lose our focus. But I think we need to pull our resources together. We need to build our collective voices so that together we can sustain and manage a sustainable CBN program in Southern Africa. Thank you very much.